were cowboys on the plains, the saddle was a tool of the trade that would grow to be a stylish heirloom of the American West. Among Don Rowlison's various pursuits, he also studies, collects, and restores Western saddles.
I do like the old saddles. I had grown up with these old saddles when I was buying these for nothing because I didn't want to tear up my good saddle. It cost me $113, and that was all my summer's wages. And so I was going to farmers and stuff and finding old saddles that were hanging in the barn, and I was getting them anywhere from $10 to $15 of pretty good quality stuff. And so that's what got me started on the saddle and the restoration, because I restored them on my own. And I am not a professional restorer. I have just picked stuff up. Here I have a variety of saddles. This isn't nearly the varieties, as styles change through time all the way through. But you can see the difference in what is called the swells or the pommels. This is called a slick fork. This was very common in the 1880s and later. And then as rodeo came in, they kind of expanded on the swells to get a little bit of grip on them, and then the extreme that was called a bear trap. But this is where cowboys would be rodeoing, and the thing is they'd sit in a saddle and they could lock their part of their thighs in the top, and the horse couldn't get them out. But these were very dangerous. If a horse happened to rear and went over backwards, you're stuck. And also with the saddle horns on them. Some of them were brass, some of them were silver, nickel plate, but these are very hard to rope from because your rope slips on it and you can't build them up enough. If you're roping, you want a bigger diameter saddle horn in the neck of it, and you need it wrapped. Now, a lot of the ropers will just wrap rubber around it. I found out that if it's rubber wrapped with inner tube rubber, that has enough grip that when you dowley or wrap your rope around the horn and it's really tight, it'll eventually tear it off. So the old cowboys would wrap them in rope or string, but this string is more forgiving. But also the cowboys on the trail in the 1880s didn't have inner tubes for their wagons, so they used strings or frayed pieces of rope to go around. The smooth leather is which I prefer because it's easier to keep clean. This saddle is a Lumar made in Preston, Kansas. They aren't making saddles anymore, but I tend to go for Kansas saddles. This particular saddle is a rough out. It's more of a suede than anything. And then there's saddles too, such as the McClellan. This is a cavalry saddle. It probably dates 1930s, 1940s, but it's a lot shorter because it has a band on it that says it's a 12-inch seat. That's from here to here. Well, these other saddles, this one I know is a 14-inch seat. This one's a 15-inch seat. This one's a 14.5-inch seat. And so there were various seats, but the McClellan was made for the horse and not for the man. You can see the big gap in the middle. If you were out on campaign, your horse would get skinny. You're riding them maybe 30, 35 miles a day. Their backbone would start to protrude after they got skinny. And so this was to keep the saddle off the backbone. Most of the saddles are built with a wool lining on the inside. This was put in a little bit for cushioning, but mostly it was used to hold the saddle blanket in place because the wool skin has a nap to it, and even some of the artificial wools do. So if you put it in wrong, the saddle blanket by riding will slip out the back or slip forward. So when you cut the wool, you want to cut it oppositely so that the nap on one goes down and the nap on the other, and in this case, would go up. And that holds the saddle blanket in. But probably the most important thing to keep a saddle, and as an heirloom, the main thing is to keep them clean and oiled. To clean a saddle, it takes a lot of time, and you have to do it, but it's fairly simple. A lot of people use saddle soap. So with the saddle soap, you get a brush, you get it wet, kind of a soft brush or even a sponge, and work up a lather on your saddle soap. And that lather is transferred to your saddle, and you rub that around, because the idea with saddle soap is that it will add moisture to the saddle, it helps clean it, but with the lather, it lifts the dirt to the surface. It brings it out of there. But talking to leather preservationists out of museums and stuff, years ago, they said that one thing that really worked was good old Murphy oil soap. In fact, they say it has less acids in it than the saddle soap. So with the Murphy oil soap, I will get a small container like a butter tub or something and put this in there and mix it, depending on how dirty the saddle is, half and half, or maybe a third saddle soap and 2/3 water. The most thing that I use is a toothbrush, an old toothbrush. But then you need to use water to rinse it off and then take the rag. But you need to get that residue of any oil off that you're using. The saddle next to me, I could tell that in the what we'd call the vacant spaces around the cowboy especially, when I used neat's foot oil on it, came out, it brought the color out. And so the neat's foot oil works well, but you want to use 100% neat's foot oil, because there's neat's foot oil sold in stores that is neat's foot oil compound, which is less expensive, but the neat's foot oil compound has petroleum products in it, and petroleum products destroy leather. But there's some great products out now made by Lexol leather conditioner, and the leather preservationists are saying this works quite well, and I've used it for years, and it is too. But I still use a neat's foot oil on some of it. I'm kind of a traditionalist. When you oil it with neat's foot oil, you don't want to put a whole lot of oil on, because the leather might be dry, and you'll think, well, we'll saturate it and get that in. You can't do that. Well, you can do it, but it's going to ruin it. You have to use very light coats on it, let it dry, and then apply other coats until you get the right part. But that's why it takes so long, is to redo these saddles, because there's a lot of application and a lot of drying time in between before you get back to them. And then to restitch a saddle, it's really bad, because you'll see stitching pulled on a lot of the saddle where the stitching's worn. Well, a lot of the stitching on a saddle is 8 stitches per inch, or with the military saddles, they're 16 per inch. But basically, I consider of doing 1 inch per hour on these. And what I do is use one thread with a needle on each end of the thread, and you go through every hole twice, and that's called the saddle stitch. When I used to work on other people's saddle, I would say there's no guarantee on when I'll have it done, because I don't know the condition of it yet. Some of them I could kind of predict. This particular saddle, I think I worked on it by the time I got it oiled and up to what it is now. I think it off and on for 3 years. So it does take a long time. The cost can get up there pretty high, depending on the restorer, how bad the leather is and stuff. So it's really better, if you do want something restored, to do it mostly yourself at home and be satisfied with it, and take a long time, and you don't have to pay for all the labor that goes into these as a time, because it's very time consuming and very slow work. This particular saddle was made years ago for me. I designed it, and it was made by a leather tooler in the penitentiary at Leavenworth. He was a tooler, and so they didn't want to waste his time, so he tooled everything all up. And what's also neat too, what he tooled, is what I requested, is a tooling of a buffalo skull on the back. Now, a lot of tooling was put on not only for decoration, but also for friction, because a saddle that you ride a lot and it gets slick and shiny, but you don't have as much grip. So they put the tooling on for decoration, but also a little bit for grip, because the tooling causes friction between your jeans or whatever you're wearing and the saddle, and it's a better grip. The tooling on a saddle is actually an art. You have to be an artist to do it, and there's a lot to do about it, and that's one reason I'm not a tooler, is I'm not an artist, and I don't have the patience. Because it takes a lot of time to do it, you have to do it right. We're in John Steeples' leather shop in rural Rooks County. I've known him for years, and he is an artist, and he's a craftsman as far as doing the patterns in them and stuff, and the various sorts of saddles. So today we're going to visit with him on things on how a saddle is actually built. We'll talk a little bit about the tooling of the saddle and the work that goes into it. So the saddle itself starts out with what's called the tree, and it's usually wood, and with the wooden trees, they have bars on them. And this is the bar. It's very simple. These bars, but you see this gap in between. Well, to start the saddle out to make, you need to span that gap in there, and that is what the saddle makers called the ground seat. So how do you start the ground seat, John?
Well, you take a piece of tin, and the tin actually has a rounded area in the back of it, and it's nailed in around here like this, and then you tap it in with a hammer to give it a little bit of dish, or basically a place, you know.
Yeah, and this is a dish in here.
Right.
So, yeah.
Then you have to start bending it up like this, and then down in order to nail it up to the front, you know. So there's a lot of stretching of the tin that needs to happen just by tapping it with a hammer. You'll feel any bump that is in that, even through 2 or 3 thicknesses of leather, you know. So it needs to be smooth and have a nice dish for your tailbone.
Yeah, so there's leather over the tin seat that's in here. And so it is skived down or beveled down so it matches this. And so that is very important for the comfort of the saddle. That's the foundation. The tree's the foundation, but the ground seat is the foundation for the seat and basically the rest of the saddle. The tree of the saddle basically has 4 parts. It has what's called the cantle, the bars that we saw underneath, and this is called the fork, or sometimes the pommel.
Or the
swell. When we talk about the swells, it's on here, because you can have a wise fork or smooth fork, but this has a swelled fork on it.
This is what they call a slick fork. It's got nothing, no bulge, no swell to it, and this is a Wade tree. This is a Will James tree that typically has a 13-inch swell and a little bit of undercut to it.
And this is the undercut in through here.
And both of these have wood post horns on them it's actually a piece of the wood that goes into the front of it, and it's just been sculpted round and the neck of it.
And so, you wrap the horn, and this takes a lot of patience too, because you have to have the leather wet, right?
It has to be just perfect.
And it has to be perfect, and it has to be tight.
Yeah.
If everything goes right, you've soaked your leather, and you've probably let it soak probably at least half hour, maybe more.
Oh, you really don't want to soak it.
You just want it damp and pliable.
Yeah, good and pliable, and then letting it dry out for a little bit to where the color kind of comes back to it. That's when it's perfect. Yeah.
So you stitch your cap on it, and that probably it would take me a long time to do that. If it was a perfect world and everything went right, how long do you think that'd take you?
The total horn thing, probably about 4 hours.
4 hours on that. So we have a lot of time in it. You did the ground seat, and about how much time would that take?
Well, the problem with that is the more you look at it, the more you take out of it and dress it down, trying to get every little bump, you know, that's showing up out of it. Just this one piece, probably 3 or 4 hours. Mm-hmm. So this is a flat plate rigging, and you know, as opposed to, say, an in-skirt rigging where the rigging is actually in the skirts underneath the tree.
And this takes time too, because these have to be perfect also. They have to be perfectly balanced, because if you get one side longer than the other and cinch up the horse, the saddle will set crooked on a horse's back. Mm-hmm. Well, we have the cantle cover started on the outside. it looks, like a big fan-shaped deal. But it depends on what you want to do with it, because there's some saddles that have a Cheyenne roll, and that is where this is folded down, so it's kind of a handle on the back.
If you were to put a straight up cantle binding on it rather than lay it back for a Cheyenne roll, you wouldn't have this much leather to be messing with.
And of course the seat isn't in this yet for the final deal, because all of this will be covered. The person has to sit in here.
That's the pocket.
That's the pocket. And those can be built up in various ways and even foam padded. Do you do any padded seat saddles?
I did one. That's the only one I ever built, and I hated it.
I never preferred them. Did you?
No.
I've never had one of my own that has a padded seat.
I had one. I thought it was okay, but that was before I really realized how comfortable a saddle can be without
that's
it.
That's right.
Spending hours in the saddle, it's nice to have a little slide instead of a lot of stick.
It is. How long will it take you to put the seat in, do you think?
That'll be a full day process for me. First of all, you start with basically a rectangular shaped piece of leather, find the center of it, and try and get it laying on your center line. And usually you do one side at a time and then match it with the other side. About the next step after you get the seat in, you can go ahead and start fitting your skirts up, and that's one of the first things you do is block the skirts. And so then you take them off, because there's no sense in having them on there while you're trying to do all this other stuff.
And the blocking is kind of a reinforcement in the leather to get all the underside of the saddle smooth. And so the blocking usually extends from the edge up towards the tree a little bit, because that's another big process in there to get that right before you put the pelt in.
And once you get the sheepskin on it, then stitch it and then fit it back onto the tree again, and make sure everything's where you want it.
And this is considered a jockey. There's front jockeys sometimes and rear jockeys, and that's just the name. But the tree is in the middle of these, and also the inskirt or the rigging too. The flat plate rigging was on the inside also. The leather that hangs on the stirrup, you have stirrup leathers on the inside that are straps, and then this part of the saddle is called the fender. This one has a maker's mark on it. Some saddles made in the factories don't. This is a maker's mark, and it shows who made it usually or where it came from. And this particular one says J.C. Steeples for John C. Steeples, Zurich, Kansas, and in the middle is the maker. This is absolute incredible craftsmanship, and this saddle has been used a lot, and it still retains its aesthetic beauty. It still retains its sturdiness. This saddle has what's called the basket weave stamp on it. Tooling has various functions, but to tool the leather, it takes a good quality leather to do it, and it takes a lot more time to do that. So with this one stamped almost everywhere, how many hours do you think it would take just for the stamping?
I imagine there's probably 30 or 40 hours just stamp work on that thing. It takes time.
When you talk about stamping, and a lot of people consider that tooling, you don't have it pre-stamped or pre-tooled before you put it on. So it has to be on your saddle.
And that's where it gets really interesting when you're trying to make a stamp go over the top, of a swell cover like that, and keep your lines straight and make it look like something.
And so that's why the custom-made saddles that really have the craftsmanship in them are so high-priced, because there's a lot of time and a lot of talent that goes into these. So, John, you've moistened this leather, right? Mm-hmm. This for demonstration.
What you really want to do is you want it to be cool to the touch. What I've got in here is just water and a product called Carvey. It doesn't take very much in it, but it seems like if you're going to do any swivel knife cuts Like this is a swivel knife. It's got a sharp blade. They come in different sizes and different shapes. I kind of prefer the smaller knife like this. You just pull it through your work. You can pull it or push it. You have to consider the thickness of your leather that you're carving on too. And of course, deeply carved leather looks prettier than just kind of a superficial facial carve, but you can cut through leather with these pretty easy. So it depends on what you're actually going to be doing, whether you're going to be floral carving or basket stamping. But if you're going to do a basket stamp, you need the line to work off of, and you'll use a maul. You can get these in several different sizes and weights. If you're trying to get a deep impression, like with a basket stamp or something, you'll want something that's got a pretty good thump to it. But you'll start on your line like this, go to the other side of your line, and connect the two.
And so you want to be consistent you're just tapping it twice to get the depth all even.
I mean, you could probably do it in one, but you need to give them all at least the same amount.
Okay.
So it actually looks right.
But that works quite well where you have it on here, but when you have the saddle going on the swells, it takes quite a bit of time to be able to
you
go with the curves
can't exactly
and the lines.
spin it like
you can't really spin it and manipulate it around.
And it gives it a basket weave pattern. That's why it's called a basket stamp. There's different kinds of stamps that you can do different things with. This is kind of a snowflake pattern, and you can connect it on the sides, and essentially it forms a flower in the center, like so. This is a kind of a border stamp that you can use along long lines. You just connect it, and it leaves kind of a scallop look to the edge of it. I don't know, saddles were something that always fascinated me, and I thought, man, if I could build my own saddle, that'd be awesome. I think it's the thing I enjoy the most about it is you're creating something. You have the satisfaction when you're done looking at something that you've made. Here's a billfold that I made, and it's just something about, wow, I made this. I can't believe that.
Just the satisfaction of creating something.
Yeah.
But I see them as saddles as being tools, and some of the tools you want them to look as good as you can.
Mm-hmm.
John, being the cattleman that he is, has ridden a lot of saddles, so he knows what it takes. He's ridden a lot of different horses, and he always has had good horses. He knows as a saddle fits, it is a tool, and he uses that as a tool in his occupation. So you might as well have nice tools and nice horses, and it makes the occupation just a little bit easier sometime. You might as well be riding in style while you're doing it.